just going to launch the program here. Go MightyBake. In terms of unique features that are specific to MightyBake, the first thing to talk about is the presets drop down here. So basically what this is you can name presets for whatever bake you're currently working on, and it saves it to this list here, and then you can come back to it at any time and click it, and it'll populate with whatever settings, whichever high-low you're baking from, whatever settings you've set here, whatever map types you want to bake for that specific preset. So for example, you could be working on your normal map or whatever, and come back to it a month later and just select it from the list here and just load it up, and it'll populate whatever you had set that last time, so you don't have to remember where the high or the low is or anything like that. This feature actually came from a polycount forum request. I think a character artist wanted it because he might bake the head separate from the hair, separate from the clothes or the boots or whatever, and so it was painful for him to type this in every time he would do a bake, and then he'd move on to his next map and have to retype it in or whatever. So he would make one for the body, the head, the clothes. What I end up using it for the most though is besides coming back to the asset that you've last baked or whatever, if you have to fix a bug or something or make some art direction adjustments, I actually just save a preset for my test bake file, so every time I get a new version of MightyBake, I can just quickly rebake those maps and make sure everything is good, nothing broke with the new version that was released, and test any new features, test any new map types that have been added. The next thing to discuss is a really neat feature. When you bake a tangent space normal map, or any normal map for that matter in MightyBake, it automatically generates the object space map for you. So for guys that use Dedo or anyone that needs object space normal maps, you get them automatically anytime you bake any type of map. It's always just there. You bake a tangent space map and the object space map is generated at the same time. The really cool thing about this is that it doesn't take any longer to bake. So it's not like I baked the tangent space map and now I'm waiting for the object space map to bake out. You actually bake them out at the same time, and it doesn't add any slowness to the process. So for example, technically speaking, you could say that in something like XNormal, you would have to bake the tangent space map, and then you'd have to go back and then bake the object space map after. So you could technically say that MightyBake is at least twice as fast as anything on the market, because it bakes the two maps at the same time and still comes in under what it takes to bake a single map in the other bakers. The next thing to talk about is the envelope or the cage in MightyBake. It'll probably be familiar if you're a Maya user, but if you're an XNormal user or Max user, I think, basically in Maya and in MightyBake, the shape of your envelope geometry, the number of vertices that's in it, it doesn't matter. It makes no difference. MightyBake doesn't care if you're baking a sphere as the high poly and the low poly, and you're using a cube as the envelope. What MightyBake uses the envelope for is purely to block the rays that it shoots out to capture the high poly to the low poly information. So if you're spending a lot of time, even in Maya, if you're spending a lot of time in Maya or MightyBake kind of tweaking your cage, that's actually wasted work. It has no impact on the quality of the bake that you get out. It literally just blocks the rays. So if you've got an exploded model or something and it doesn't have any complicated convex shapes or overlapping shapes, and you don't want it to bake to the part beside it or whatever, you can literally just model a cube in Maya and put that around the mesh and export that as the envelope, and then it'll bake fine. Which I'm used to doing that in Maya. So I think some people are used to baking cylinders or whatever, and they'll see that waviness or whatever, that kind of waviness on the edge of the cylinder. And in some bakers, you can you can look at that from the side view and it looks all wavy. If you look at it in the 3/4 view, it looks fine. So you can kind of take your pick, which one do you want it to look correct in. In MightyBake, you don't have the option of changing the shape of the cage to kind of change the shape of your bake, which I personally really like because it just removes a variable that I don't have to deal with. So, but it's important to know that. So you shouldn't bother trying to tweak your cage to get a different bake result. It won't make any difference. And then you can also use really simplified cages that are just like blocking meshes. And I'll show you an example of what I mean in Maya just so it's clear. So here's a shape. Let's pretend this is a low poly in Maya. And it's got a bunch of concave shapes here. So obviously when it shoots the ray out, it's gonna hit the face here, and it's gonna return this face onto this face. So typically you would extrude an envelope and make it super precise and block the rays there, or you can lower the search distance and see if that works out for you. But lowering the search distance is a global setting, so it might miss some areas that you want. But basically in MightyBake, all you would need to do for a cage for this object is you can just like create some janky ass shit just in the side view camera or whatever for this particular mesh. Like could go even something as ghetto as create polygon tool and just draw, like, doesn't really matter, like it could be like this, all like not a nice fit around the object. It's really just going to shoot the ray out until it hits this like collision volume, and it'll keep this area here from projecting down. Like from here it'll hit this edge and then it'll return that face, which will be your high poly, because your high poly will be pretty close to this area, and then here it will shoot the ray out and block it to prevent it from returning this face or that face or whatever. So like as long as it's relatively close to the shape of the model, like maybe I wouldn't leave that much because some rays might actually sneak by or whatever, but doing something like that is fine. What's really cool is like the triangulation doesn't matter, the number of verts doesn't matter, the UVs don't matter. Like you can provide this with any geometry you want and it'll go through MightyBake fine. You don't have to prep it in any special way or anything like that. It'll just work, and it'll work effectively at blocking the rays if you kind of saran wrap it or whatever. But literally, like making a cube would also work. That's a valid envelope if you're not trying to block a convex shape. If you're just trying to block like an exploded model from one piece of it to rendering onto the other, like a valid cage for this. If you were just saying like, oh, the max distance works fine for me as is, it's just I've got some floating bits in front of it that I don't want to project onto the surface. You could literally just do that, and that's also a valid envelope. So that's a really cool feature. The next feature, which people might not be used to, that's unique to MightyBake, but if you're a Maya guy, you might already kind of be familiar with how this works. Is in MightyBake, you'll see this direction down here in the bottom right hand corner, and it says geometry normals or surface normals. So the difference between these two things, this is Maya terminology, and this is a feature just from Maya. The geometry normals will bake seamlessly across hard edges that you've set on the model, and by hard edges I mean like a smooth or soft edge, or like a smoothing group in Max. But at the risk of having higher levels of distortion across the surface. The surface normals will bake like really good non-distorted normal maps, but they don't allow you to bake cleanly across hard and soft edges. So the model that I have here, this is one of the models that I used to just test MightyBake. You can see I've got hard edges here to fix up shading errors instead of adding edge loops, and then I have soft edges here. So when I bake with the geometry normals, it's all good. Everything just like comes out perfect. It smooths across everything. It bakes the shading into the tangent map to compensate for the poor shading in the low poly. But if I switch it over to surface normals and then I just rebake it, you'll see here when it updates, see it gets this weird kind of like cracking or whatever. It almost looks like a double beveled edge or something. You see it here as well. So this is unavoidable to my knowledge when you bake with hard edges or a different smoothing group between the two faces with surface normals. And currently our ghetto fix for this at work anyways is or even at home is we generally just like bake both maps and then we like hand composite the edges out to get around it. There's other things that you can do by adding more geometry to the edges, or if you've got a model that has all soft edges, I would always recommend baking surface normals. This will give you like a perfect bake with no distortion in it because you won't have to worry about any hard edges. If you've got a mixed model, then I would always bake geometry normals and then potentially bake surface normals as well and composite the two maps together to fix up the edges. So here I'll just switch it back to geometry normals. And I'll just click rebake, and it's baking. There, it's done. And so you can see there, it's all cleaned up. So the next thing to talk about is MightyBake is multi-threaded. So you can see here. Oops, I'll close that down. So in the main interface here in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the number of processors. So this is how many physical and virtual processors your PC has. So I have a i7, and I guess it's got 4 cores and then 8 threads total. So you can see I've got 1 all the way to 8. So for example, like Maya's Baker is super slow because it's only single threaded to my knowledge. So it's just it can't like break up the map and put it on like different CPUs. Last time I did my speed benchmark in MightyBake, it was the fastest one on the market to my knowledge, especially for high to low AO baking, but also for normal map baking as well. All the other map types bake almost instantaneously, so there's no point really discussing the speed or anything other than normals and AO. But if you're, if you install MightyBake or whatever, this should be set to the highest number. That'll give you the fastest bakes. And then the cool thing about MightyBake is, the faster your computer is, the more threads it has, the faster the bakes happen. So like my computer at work, I think it's something crazy like 32 threads. And so this will actually show you, it says like 32 processors, and it bakes a bit faster than it does at home. And then the final thing to talk about is the special Maya shelf and export buttons that MightyBake ships with. So the super cool thing about MightyBake specifically is, for Maya users anyways, I haven't tried Max because I don't know how to use Max or Moto or any of the other packages, but for Maya users, MightyBake has a shelf that you install. And how you do that is you go to workflow and you go to Maya and you say install shelf. You should close Maya before you do this, and you pick which version of Maya you want to install the shelf for, and you say yes. And basically what it does is in Maya it brings up this shelf here, so you can see it creates a MightyBake shelf, and it's got a high, an envelope, and a low button. And the high and the envelope aren't quite as important as the low button, but the low button is like a special script that somehow compensates for the Maya tangent basis and triangulation direction. So for example, I can send out this low poly model. Oops, it's got crease edges set on it. And it can have a combination of, like, I've got some tris here, I've got some quads, I've got a ton of n-gons, and I have some soft and hard edges. You can send that out using the Maya low button as your export, and that will bake flawlessly in MightyBake. It'll bake flawlessly for Unreal 4.7, it'll bake flawlessly for the Maya viewport, and it doesn't matter like what your triangulation is or anything. You don't have to prep the mesh in any special way, which is probably one of my favorite things about MightyBake. So I just model my low however I want to model it, and it's good to go. You just select it and you click this button and you say, pick a folder and save it, and then you're into MightyBake and you're baking your low poly. So I think that's pretty unique because I've used other bakers and it's like in XNormal it's a super pain. I have to like prep my mesh, and then it's always complaining that it's not triangulated, and then I get like triangulation mismatch errors, and it's just a nightmare. It takes forever, and it's something that I never want to deal with. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this, but I don't think there's any way to actually bake a map in any software and view it in the Maya viewport except the Maya Baker and in MightyBake. So if your workflow is preview in Maya and then bake a map for Unreal 4, for example, that's what most of the guys prefer to do. And that's kind of how I prefer to work as well. I think MightyBake is probably the only thing on the market that could actually give you that feature, where you could preview your bake in Maya and then use that exactly the same mesh to import into Unreal and have the maps link up between the two softwares without doing some special kind of trickery and like pre-triangulating it and then like not viewing the one in Maya and pre-triangulating it before it goes into Unreal, or pre-triangulating it before you do the bake. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It actually makes it really easy. Your low poly just needs to be UV'd, and that's really the only requirement that it has. And then like we discussed before, the envelope is really cool because it doesn't need to match anything to do with your low poly. It doesn't need to be UV'd. Doesn't matter what triangulation either. So the workflow is really streamlined for Maya users anyways. I recommend that you guys all get up on the forum if you try the software and it doesn't work as seamlessly as Maya, and get the guy to add your own shelf for whatever software you use to make it magical like it is in Maya. I'll give you a quick example of kind of what that looks like actually in the Maya viewport. So here's the map that I've baked for the Maya viewport. It's all awesome and looks great. It's all my wacky, like terribly shaped mesh with all types of weird triangulation, n-gons, and soft hard edges and all that malarkey. And then if you go into MightyBake, you've got a list of stuff here where you can bake to the various different tangent spaces and triangulation orders or whatever. So I baked the Maya viewport one. It looks good in Maya, but I don't have to bake the map because I've already baked it. But I'll show you. I'll apply the Unreal 4 map to the Maya viewport, and you'll kind of see what happens to the mesh here. So it's looking all good. Everything's fine. I'll just browse, and we'll do the Unreal 4.7 map, and you'll see it looks totally fucked up. Actually, it looks probably more fucked up because the Y is inverted. So I'll just rebake it here on the fly because it's so fast. There we go, it updates. So you can see there's all types of, they've got triangulation errors here. Maybe that's triangulation, maybe that's a tangent space error, but the map looks all crappy. The shading is all screwed up on it. So it might look screwed up in Maya, but in fact, if you were to import this exact same mesh into Unreal and apply this normal map to it in Unreal, it would actually look perfect. It would look just as good as the Maya one. So you can basically, the magic of the system is you can work with a single low poly mesh without worrying about triangulation, and when it gets into your target engine of choice, the maps will just work. They've already been baked to the correct format without having to do any extra work to get it. So a lot of the guys they'll actually create like a PSD and they'll have the Maya map as the bottom layer, and then when they're ready, and then they'll have all their composited layers sitting on top of that with all their noise or whatever that they get from Nald or Endu. And then when they're ready to submit to Unreal 4, they just switch this over to Unreal 4.7 and then bake the final map that looks all fucked up in Maya, but when you put it into Unreal 4 it looks great. And they just have those two layers there so that when they want to look at it in Maya, they just turn that layer off, and then leave all their 2D composite layers on top of that. And then when they want to see it in Unreal, they just show the Unreal layer and just save the PSD. That's kind of the general workflow that I would recommend. And then here's the pop between the Unreal 4.7 map and back to the Maya map. So you can see with the triangulation errors and the tangent error, shading errors all over it. I'll just switch back to the Maya map between the two. And you can see, boom, there it goes away. It's all perfectly good. And if I go back to the Unreal map, it's all broken. So depending on what engine you want to view your map in, you'd have to display a specific normal map for that engine.